I am John Preston, and I want to ask you, what are you willing to do for the sake of wealth? In the pursuit of money, many people commit very stupid and thoughtless actions and do not even think about the consequences. I am an ordinary single-minded guy. I always believed that I could achieve something. I have a wonderful wife and a job that consistently brought us money. But at one point, everything changed. I was faced with a difficult choice, and I could have lost absolutely everything, even my life. And I want to share my story. I have always believed that the toughest trials only serve to strengthen the spirit. This story began a long time ago, when I was still a student at a construction college, dreaming of building a career that could secure the future of my family. My wife, Linda, with whom we were in our first year of marriage, had just become pregnant with our first child. We were young, full of hope, and terribly afraid of the upcoming changes in our life. The economic crisis that hit us then seemed like an insurmountable challenge. My parents did everything possible to help, but their means were limited. Linda worked as a cashier in a store, and her salary was tiny, but she never complained. Her smile and support were my refuge during those days, even though I understood that optimism alone could not overcome all these difficulties. Every day I would go to classes and then to a part-time job, trying to earn a bit of money. In the evenings I would come home, and Linda and I would share our experiences and plans for the future. Despite the fatigue, we always found time to sit together, embrace, and dream about what our life would look like after I finished my education. When Robert was born, our life changed radically. Every moment became filled with new cares and joys. Linda took a short maternity leave, then returned to work, while I continued to study and work at the same time, believing strongly that education would greatly help me in the future. We were a team, ready to overcome any difficulties for the sake of our child. Several years later, Ruth was born, our second bundle of joy. By then, we were much stronger and wiser. I had finally graduated from college and found a job at a young construction firm. Starting my career was challenging, but I was determined to prove my competence. Linda was also making strides. She became a financial consultant and found a new job she enjoyed. Despite not having a financial education, she took some courses, learned to understand numbers, and now plans budgets for her clients, teaches them about investments, and all that. Incidentally, she also manages our family budget. Besides all this, she had a hobby. She took up sports. Every evening, she would run for 30 minutes along the street. Every morning, she would do a 15-minute workout, and she visited the gym several times a week. After the birth of our children, she had gained quite a bit of weight, which bothered her. Though I always tried to convince her she was just being hard on herself, her initiative to start working out and the results that followed made me happy because she became incredibly attractive. Her perseverance and desire to stay in shape inspired me. We have been through a lot together, and each challenge only made our relationship stronger. Every time I came home, I knew this was my place of strength with a loving wife and children. What more could one need for happiness? After graduating from college, I immediately started job hunting, which was quite difficult as large firms were reluctant to hire a young specialist. However, I was lucky to find a startup company, realizing it was a great opportunity. If the company could stand on its feet in the future, my family and I would have stability. Therefore, I understood that I wanted to be at the very source of its development. My job at the construction firm began very promisingly. I quickly integrated into the team, found common ground with my colleagues, and even managed to stand out thanks to my perseverance and hard work. Mr. Rosario, my boss, promoted me several times, and over 5 years of work, we were able to reach a respectable level. At that time, things started looking up for Linda and me. Linda was raising the kids, while I was earning money and feeling like I was in the right place. Mr. Rosario was a teacher and mentor to me. He was a mature 60-year-old man, very wise and amusing. Everything was going well until one day, changes occurred that completely overturned the usual order of our company. That day, I arrived at work as usual in the morning, but the atmosphere in the office was tense. The whispers of colleagues reached my ears even before I had taken off my coat. "New boss," were the words I heard from every corner. Our previous leader, who was respected by everyone for his honesty and openness, was replaced by his son, Brian Rosario. The first thing that struck me about Brian was his self-confidence and a certain arrogance. He was young, energetic, and, it seemed to me, overly self-assured. On his first day in the new position, he gathered all the employees and announced the upcoming changes. Optimization and efficiency were his slogans, but behind these words was something more significant: mass layoffs. The following few weeks proved to be a real test for all of us. My colleagues, with whom I had made friends, were being fired one after another. The atmosphere in the office became increasingly tense. I came to work daily, not knowing if that day would be my last. However, despite all my fears, Brian kept me in the company. He even invited me to his office and told me that he was impressed with my work results. This conversation slightly lifted my spirits, but I still felt some mistrust towards the new boss. His management methods and approach to business seemed too harsh and ruthless to me. I understood that for him it was just business, but for me and many of my colleagues, it was a second family that we had been building for years. Days went by, and I tried to adapt to the new realities. Linda supported me, as always, saying that it was just another challenge we would overcome together. I tried to look to the future with optimism, but at least I was relieved that I hadn't been fired and remained in my stable and profitable position, which meant I couldn't let my family down. After the company underwent mass layoffs, there was a period of relative calm. Brian Rosario, our new boss, decided to organize a corporate event to, as he said, unite the team and boost morale. I was skeptical about it, but I must admit, I was curious to see what would come of it, considering it was a new experience. And as far as I was aware, the event would not only include people from our company, but also from several others, presenting a great opportunity for networking. When the invitation arrived, I immediately decided to bring Linda along. She had always been my rock, and I wanted her by my side that evening. Moreover, after all the recent events, it wouldn't hurt for both of us to have a distraction. "Will you come to the event with me?" I asked. "Of course, I haven't dressed up for so long," Linda said, and began choosing an outfit. We rarely went out, so we even went shopping the day before the event to buy her a new dress. Linda wanted a black, short, form-fitting dress with a revealing neckline, which looked quite provocative. But I approved of Linda's choice. I wanted everyone to be envious of how beautiful my wife is. The event took place in one of the city's finest restaurants. The place was elegantly decorated, and everything seemed surprisingly refined and expensive. I noticed Linda admiring the hall with delight. Seeing her smile and the sparkle in her eyes was a great joy for me. We felt like we were at some important event. The evening started quite relaxed. We talked with colleagues who I was lucky enough to continue working with and their companions. It was nice to see people trying to forget the recent worries and just enjoy the moment. Then Brian appeared. He came over to greet us. I introduced him to Linda, and their eyes met. Something about that moment made me tense, although I couldn't exactly say what. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, or how she reacted to his presence. I don't know. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I saw Brian and Linda talking from time to time, and each time it gave me a strange feeling. I tried to convince myself that it was just friendly conversation, but the longer they talked, the more apparent their mutual interest became. Linda distanced herself from me and talked with Brian, ignoring me, and I couldn't say anything because Brian was my employer, and I didn't want to ruin our relationship. Anyway, I trusted Linda and believed she wouldn't destroy what we had built together for so long. We returned home late at night. Linda seemed pleased. She spoke about the evening with enthusiasm, especially mentioning Brian, how lucky I was to have such a boss, and that we needed to establish a close relationship with him, as it would open up new opportunities. I tried to listen and respond, but deep down, I felt uneasy. In any case, there was nothing wrong. Linda was a smart girl who was good at finance and had already helped more than 40 clients with their budgets. A week after the event, I received a bonus, not understanding why. Brian simply issued me a check for good service. "Take care of your wife. She's a sweetheart," Brian said, and I didn't like his tone. But the money he gave us was very much needed. Following Brian's advice, I spent part of the bonus on Linda. We bought her new clothes, and she got herself an expensive cosmetic procedure, and overall everyone was quite happy, which pleased me the most. Despite all my doubts and concerns about Brian, life went on as usual. My days were filled with work, family evenings, and rare but precious moments of solitude with Linda. Everything changed one morning when Brian invited me to his office. I expected another assignment or perhaps a discussion of projects, but the offer he made took me by surprise. "John, you have shown yourself to be one of our best employees in recent months," he began, smiling with his confident smile. "I think you deserve a break. How about spending the weekend at my country house in Italy? It would be a great opportunity to get away from work and relax a bit." I was stunned. Firstly, because Brian had never made such offers before, and secondly, because the idea of spending the weekend with my boss in another country seemed crazy to me. However, I couldn't deny that the offer was generous, and it seemed rude to refuse. "That's very generous of you, Brian. I will definitely discuss this with Linda, and if she lets me go, I would be happy to come. Who else will be going?" I replied, trying to hide my puzzlement. "Great, you'll be the only one from our company because you truly are the best employee. And John, I'm inviting not just you, but also Linda. I think she will like it too." His words sounded innocent, but something in his tone made me wary. However, I decided not to jump to conclusions. "I don't understand. Who else will be there besides me, my wife, and you?" I asked. "There will be my friends and major entrepreneurs," he replied, and I was completely shocked. I realized the opportunity to interact with real businessmen in Italy was incredible for me. So I thanked Brian for the offer and went back to work. That same evening, I told Linda about Brian's offer. She was surprised, but the idea of a weekend away from the hustle and bustle of the city seemed attractive to her. "It could be interesting," she said with a smile. "Why not? We both need a break, and it might be a good opportunity to get out of the daily routine." "Where will we leave the kids?" I asked Linda, as if she had completely forgotten we have children. "Mom, how about your parents?" she asked, and the next day, I contacted my parents who agreed to look after the children. That's what we decided. I informed Brian that we agreed, and he seemed genuinely happy about it. We had 3 weeks for all the preparations to get the documents ready. And by the way, we didn't spend a single dollar as Brian paid for the taxi to the airport and the plane tickets. It turns out Brian had organized a private jet, which arrived at our airport, and from there we set off to Italy. For Linda and me, it was our first flight ever, and on a private jet at that, it was something incredible. On the plane, besides Linda and me, there were 8 other people, including Brian and his girlfriend Donna, as well as the entrepreneur Edward O'Connell, who owned his own candle manufacturing plant in China, and his companion. Mark Moyer had his own consulting agency, among others. It felt pretty strange to be in such a setting, being just a regular employee at a company and sitting on a private jet with major businessmen. It was very awkward, but to my surprise, the atmosphere quickly normalized when the flight attendant brought whiskey and everyone started drinking. Alcohol quickly brought everyone closer. We didn't notice how we landed at Albenga Airport. We got off the plane and were met by 2 SUVs, on which we drove for about 3 hours until we arrived at a real villa. Arriving at Brian's country house was a real revelation. Located on the riverbank amidst lush forests, the house looked like something out of a painting, spacious, secluded, with a perfect combination of luxury and homely comfort. We started preparing. The men cooked meat, the ladies made snacks, and Linda and I went to explore the house. We entered our room on the third floor and were simply amazed at how spacious it was. "This room, it's like our entire floor at home," Linda joked. "Exactly," I replied. Linda began to change. She put on her new dress, which was short, and she looked simply stunning. We kissed and went to join the others. There, music was playing loudly, and glasses of expensive whiskey were being poured. It was a real millionaire's party. Gathering around a large table, Linda purposefully sat next to Brian, and I felt somewhat left out. Donna, who was introduced as Brian's girlfriend, also sat beside him, but on the other side. I was sitting opposite them, next to other men and their girlfriends. Throughout the evening, everyone was chatting and joking. I also tried to join the conversation, but it seemed as if no one was listening to me. However, as the evening turned into night, the atmosphere became more relaxed, and I noticed that the interaction between Linda and Brian became more open and flirtatious. Something about their interaction triggered an unpleasant feeling of anxiety in me, but I tried to dismiss these thoughts, reminding myself that we were here to relax and enjoy the company. I accidentally dropped a spoon and leaned over to pick it up. It had inconveniently fallen under the table, and to my dismay, I saw Brian's hand touching Linda's leg, reaching up almost under her skirt. Linda's right hand was also touching Brian, only she was touching another part of him. One might say his third leg. I got up and pretended I hadn't noticed anything, but it seemed as if Brian and Linda didn't care if I had seen them or not. What was most surprising was that Donna didn't say anything, though she must have seen everything clearly from her angle, whereas from mine it was not visible. However, I didn't say anything or express any outrage. I simply continued to eat. Later, as the guests started to retire to their rooms, Linda and I went up to ours, located on the second floor, with a view of the river. Falling asleep, I tried not to think about the day that awaited us tomorrow, and how the relationship between Linda and Brian would develop in such a setting. I could expect anything but this. Before going to sleep, Linda told me how much she liked it here and how much she had missed this. I silently supported her. At dawn, I decided to take a walk to gather my thoughts, waking up earlier than everyone else. The cool morning air and the silence of the forest helped me calm down a bit, but when I returned, I found Linda and Brian having breakfast together on the terrace, deep in conversation. Something about their interaction triggered a sudden surge of jealousy and anger in me. They noticed me and greeted me, but I couldn't respond in my usual manner. I needed time to gather my thoughts. "By the way, buddy, we're all heading to the pool now. Come join us," Brian said, as if nothing had happened. I went to change, but first, I took a contrast shower to try to come to my senses. When I came out to the pool, everyone was gathered and relaxing. I saw my wife, Linda, in a black bikini having fun sitting on Brian's shoulders, and they seemed not to pay any attention to me. I sat on a lounge chair and just observed everything. I saw a few guys sniffing something on a table near the pool while the girls next to them laughed. It felt like I had entered a circus. I saw Brian and Linda splashing in the pool, and at one point, they kissed, clearly seen by Donna, who was supposed to be Brian's girlfriend, but she seemed not to care at all. I don't know why, but I was afraid to do anything. I realized I was in a foreign country, with unfamiliar people, and anything could happen, especially since it would be easy for me to be killed without anyone ever finding me. So I sat there, not knowing what to do. The day passed in a strange haze. I tried to participate in the group activities, but my thoughts were elsewhere. I watched Linda and Brian, noticing every glance, every smile, every kiss, every touch, and they acted as if it was the norm. It felt like I was simply selling my wife. And although it looked that way, I was curious about what would happen if I started to protest, but I didn't want to test it. In the evening after dinner, Linda said she wanted to talk to me. We walked to the riverbank where no one could hear us. I braced for the worst, my heart pounding in anticipation of an unpleasant conversation. But Linda began with apologies. She said she didn't want to cause me any worry with her interaction with Brian. She explained it was just innocent communication and actions, and she didn't realize how it could affect me. You do understand we're just relaxing. I still love you. Just don't be sad, she said. And I almost believed her. But then I realized it was complete nonsense. Yet I nodded in understanding, showing I wasn't jealous. She kissed me, and we went back inside. Everyone was already tipsy, and not just from alcohol, and Linda was participating in all of it. When we returned, she immediately jumped into Brian's arms, and they passionately kissed while I silently sat on the couch. It felt like a dream. I don't know why I sat there doing nothing. Later, everyone dispersed to their rooms, and Linda and I were getting ready for bed when she said, "I have some things to do. I'll be back in a couple of hours, so go to sleep without me." She said it so casually. By the time I realized what she meant, she had already left the room, and I was left completely alone. I lay there for about 15 minutes and decided to leave the room and walk down the corridor to Brian's room. From his room, I heard Linda's loud moans, realizing I couldn't bear it any longer. I returned to my room and took all of Linda's documents from her bag and put them into mine. I lay in bed and waited. 2 hours later, Linda returned to the room and collapsed into bed. I even managed to watch a movie in that time. A few minutes later, I got out of bed and gathered my belongings. I went into Brian's room and saw him sleeping alone in his bed. I started rummaging through his belongings and found his passport, bank cards, and phone, and put them all in my bags. I did the same with Donna, who posed as Brian's girlfriend. I went through all the rooms, taking everyone's documents, cards, and phones, and put everything in a bag. Since everyone had been drinking all day and more, they all slept like babies, so I definitely didn't disturb anyone. I descended to the living room and saw Donna sleeping on the sofa, which amused me. I carefully exited through the yard and headed to the SUVs we had arrived in. I slashed all 4 tires of one SUV with a knife, removed its battery, and also damaged it to make sure it was out of commission. I started another SUV and carefully drove away from the villa. I was scared. My hands were shaking, but I understood that I shouldn't have to endure all this. The villa was located in an area with no cell reception, so I had to drive for an hour on winding roads until I finally got a signal. Online, I found the nearest airport and booked a flight to the USA. Along the way, I stopped and threw a bag with all personal items I had stolen from the sleeping businessman and my wife into the nearest body of water, except for Brian's phone, which I kept but removed the SIM card. Once on the plane, I relaxed, having at least a few days to pull off the impossible and escape. I understood that I could be killed, but I didn't care anymore. I wanted justice to prevail. Upon arriving home, I spent a morning without sleep, running through various plans for revenge in my head. I knew what I wanted. For him, my boss, to feel the same pain and humiliation I had experienced. But I also understood that my revenge had to be cold and calculated. I didn't want to act on emotion and do something I'd later regret. By dawn, I had a plan. My revenge would be aimed at destroying Brian's company, his source of pride and income. I knew it wouldn't be easy, as years of working at his company had shown me how well protected his information system was. But I also knew its weaknesses. After all, I was one of those who had worked on some of those systems, and was there at the very beginning. My plan was to use my knowledge, and the access I still had to introduce a virus into the system that would slowly begin to destroy the data necessary for the company's operation. I knew this would lead to financial losses, and possibly the closure of the company if Brian couldn't solve the problem in time. I also wanted to create a data leak to cause significant issues for Brian with his partners and those using the company's services. That day, I arrived at the office, chatted with a couple of my friends, and shared my story with them. These were Ronald and Kevin, who took the initiative and agreed to destroy the company. In return, I promised them a substantial payment, although I hadn't figured out how to pay them, so they wouldn't have to work anymore. The first task was to unlock Brian's phone, which turned out to be easy. By evening, Ronald and Kevin had managed to bypass the biometrics and crack the passwords. I gained access to almost all of Brian's information and his life. Moreover, I accessed his bank accounts, which, to my surprise, were not locked. There was a total of about $1.5 million in his accounts. I split this sum into 40 small parts and bought cryptocurrency to make it impossible to trace where the money went in the future. In addition to this, I managed to crack the safe in Brian's office, which contained all the valuable papers and contracts. I learned the safe's password from notes on Brian's phone. However, gaining access to Brian's personal computer was problematic, so I waited for Ronald and Kevin to finish developing a virus. In the morning, I met with my small team of like-minded individuals. We gathered in a secluded place to discuss our plan and distribute roles again. Each of us knew what we had to do. Despite the excitement I felt, I saw determination in my comrades' eyes, which gave me strength. The first step was to penetrate the company's information system through vulnerabilities we had previously identified. One of my colleagues, Yu, with deep knowledge in cybersecurity, took on this task. While he worked on penetrating the system, the rest of us prepared for the next steps, which included spreading information about Brian's unethical business practices and leaking compromising financial documents. These documents confirmed that Brian had been evading taxes on a large scale and was also involved in corruption. When we accessed the necessary information, the most risky stage of our plan began. We used various platforms and contacts in the media to ensure the maximum dissemination of the data we had collected. My hand did not tremble when I pressed the send button for the first packet of documents. At that moment, I felt a strange relief mixed with anxiety about the future. We also accessed all the company's finances and transferred these funds to offshore accounts for future cashing, totaling about $30 million. The next several hours and days became a time of waiting. News of the scandal in Brian's company began to spread at an incredible speed. We watched as the company's reputation began to crumble and its financial indicators worsened. Predicting all the consequences of our actions was difficult, but we achieved what we wanted. Brian now knew his actions would not go unpunished. A couple of days later, I saw a news report about Brian and his friends being detained as they exited a private jet at the airport, and I breathed a sigh of relief. He was accused of illegal financial manipulations, tax evasion, disclosing commercial secrets, and leaking all company data. Since the company belonged to Brian, he was to bear the responsibility. I found out that my wife Linda was at the police station, so I went there, picked her up, and we drove home. Brian was sitting in jail, waiting for his trial while the investigation was underway, and as a result of the investigation, a couple of months later he was sentenced to 18 years without the possibility of parole. Moreover, real hitmen started hunting Brian because he had betrayed dozens of major investors. He was indeed in a dire situation. As for Linda and me, along with our children, we moved to another state and changed our names to hide from Brian's friends. Sitting on the porch of our villa, Linda and I started a conversation. "Wasn't it brilliant what I came up with, dear?" I said. "You're a real genius. I've never doubted you," she said. "Remember how I told you back in college that we would become millionaires? Well, I kept my promise," I said. "We make a great team," Linda said. We sat there drinking cocktails and rejoiced that our plan had worked. Now we could live without working for the rest of our lives, and I could withdraw hundreds of thousands of dollars every month.